All right.
All right.
And
Hey,
start.
Justin.
Hey, Taras. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I've been a fan for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be on Between Two Ferns. So here we are.
Between
Two frameworks.
Between two frameworks. There's lots of. Well, we both actually. Our background is Ember.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So
We're
it's
outsiders
interesting.
here.
Yeah, it's interesting to be here, right?
Enemy territory.
It's been actually really interesting. It's really interesting learning about Angular from perspective of Ember. You know, I think one thing that was really interesting for me is that I feel like I learned a lot of the right ideas in Ember, and so when I come here, I'm seeing the same kind of ideas being expressed, and it's really like it's kind of reaffirming in a way that that we did actually. There's things that we are doing in the Ember community that is actually really right, you know? And then seeing Angular community doing similar things, it feels good.
And they're all, it would be very difficult to start a brand new framework today because we have unintentionally raised the bar. Like if you go back 3 years and tell Steph, hey, when you make Ember CLI, you're actually going to be increasing the barrier of entry for somebody else to build another framework. He would have hated to hear that. Yeah. But inadvertently, we've kind of wound up there, and as these 2 or 3 major frameworks become more robust, they start to just check a lot of the same boxes, right? Like, has a great CLI experience. Now we're talking about like SDK integration. Like if you're some upstart with an idea for how an application framework should be organized, that's a lot. Like Vue.js gets announced, it goes on Hacker News, and then the first 100 comments are, but it doesn't do this and this and this and this and this, because like we've all habituated now to expecting almost like what we consider maybe traditionally like a back-end level of rigor applied to all of our front-end builds and stuff. And so part of me is really happy to see us reach parity because we speak roughly the same language, they're just dialectically different. But part of me is kind of sad because the reason I got into JavaScript in the first place was my hands were too tied from really stringent top-down back-end systems, and the JavaScript was a Wild West where I could be creative. And that's slowly changing. And so it's sort of like a loss of innocence, I think.
Well, I mean, I'd like to think. I think you're right. I think it's in a way it's constructive. It's a good thing, right? Because the fact that we're converging on good ideas is a good thing for the industry. But there is definitely on the server side, it doesn't feel as exciting, right? And so there's definitely that. I don't know. Like, what do you think we can do to kind of keep it interesting, like keep the creativity flowing?
Well, I think that transpilation, as much as people deride CoffeeScript, and now that we're in this stage where everyone is transpiling something, there is a build process in almost every JavaScript project, is it gives us the opportunity, I hope, to experiment. Tools like Babel can be used super flexibly, right? Like the fact that like the 2016, 2015, 2017 rules are like presets of the standard language is great, but it could be used for so much more to tweak and experiment with, different language features that maybe only your team ever adopts, but that's fine. But additionally too, I think that there's always going to be tinkerers and experimenters. I think look no further than like Elm and Elixir as a place where people are really, really excited on both the front end and the back end. Answering questions in a way that's just a little bit different, but taking advantage of timeless stuff we learned from functional programming or from type systems. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we just need to make space for creativity and for divergence, as opposed to always thinking like we're on this unilateral path to solving application development, because we're never going to get there.
And that's going to be boring when we get there, right? But but I think the process of getting to the boring is going to be interesting, that's for sure. Yeah. Because we've seen a lot of idea stealing, borrowing, like in the most constructive kind of way happen most recently. But I want to go back to something you're talking about, creativity.
Yeah.
Like I watched your talk yesterday, and I think for any engineer, I was selling video production, Mike, who does all the video recording, about your talk, because it was like, I think it's not even for engineers. It's actually a really helpful way to think about how to interpret what's happening, and how you can actually rechannel what's happening towards something that is going that is going to long term be potentially constructive. In your talk, you gave 6 examples of how that happened. Can you talk a little bit just about the template that you used to?
So I used the word creativity because I couldn't think of a better one, but I was starting from a disadvantage in that most of us don't consider ourselves to be creative people. You know, the popular conception of creativity is that that's artistic, that's like designers, that's like some sort of magic unicorn sauce that I don't have. You know, I build stuff, I'm a maker, you know, is the sense that most engineers have. And yet, you know, even though our industry acts like it's got it all figured out and acts very mechanical and acts very regimented and siloed and top down and predictable because we want to put on this facade that we know what we're doing.
Right.
In reality, once we're inside those boxes, we often feel really constrained and confused because the processes and the hierarchies that we tend to follow as developers and as engineering organizations don't necessarily map one-to-one with how programming actually happens.
Right.
And so I think something anyone can relate to is feeling frustrated and feeling like upset in their current role and powerless to do anything about it. And so the starting point for the talk yesterday was this like Mad Libs like template to say like, in my case, and this might be relatable to other people, I had the means and the motive and the opportunity identified for myself as a sense of, you know, indignation and frustration and care mad about something that I didn't like. Incompetence, feeling like I didn't have the capability to do the change inside the organization or the environment that I was in. I didn't have the skills or I didn't have the influence. And finally, inadequacy, feeling like I wasn't being heard or listened to or accepted. And so the Mad Libs template is, you know, like I feel this kind of indignation and frustration, but I'm incompetent, I don't know how to fix it. So maybe if I try, maybe if I build something, even find a safe space and tinker a little bit and experiment with the ideas and the frustrations to exercise them, then I'll feel like less inadequate and better equipped to go and take that into more important and dramatic stages of my life. Like maybe raising a hard, crucial conversation with my boss or interfacing differently with my team and kind of, you know, trying to have more influence from a position of strength. And those little creative projects really help because giving, like you said, a formula, having a system through which you can sort of think through those negative emotions so that you land at positive outcomes. So you like, they become actionable instead of just paralyzing, which is how I think most people feel when they're angry or they're frustrated.
I think it's for a lot of people, the feelings that they have, a lot of in many cases they can be resolved with some action. Like a lot of times people can feel stuck because they don't know how to act, and so having some kind of direction that would give them some hint of like, I could maybe do this as a way of addressing it. But how do you feel, like how do you know that this is the right, like how did you settle on one of the ideas that you wanted to solve, like that last part of the equation, like how did you figure out what that might be? For me,
I'll answer your question a little bit indirectly.
Okay.
Because I've been doing open source for years and I go to a lot of conferences, I meet a lot of people who, you know, maybe at lunch or something, they feel like a sort of shame that they don't do open source. Like, no one needs to do this. Like it's actually kind of like, if you think of it in strict economic terms, it's sort of a waste of your time. You're doing all this work for free, other businesses might profit from it, you will probably profit not at all from it. Right. So like maybe there's something better to do, right? So like, don't feel ashamed if you don't do open source. But the same people will often tell me, I've got this project, like a friend of mine, he's a New Zealander, named Rishi Walker. He was like, you know, I'm working on this Ember-inspired backend framework for Node.js applications. And I was like, that sounds awesome. It's Ash, that's right, yeah. And I was like, this is like a really clever idea, a concept, and it's gonna be a boatload of work, but you know, people working on those sorts of stuff in secret, they're shy, they're sheepish, they think it's ambitious, and so they're like, it's not ready yet, I'm not gonna publish it yet. I'm waiting until it's done, but that day never comes. Vast majority of the time, you're never ready to open source something. It implies that there's something about it that should be closed source. And so to answer your question of like, how do I know what project to work on to solve a particular problem? The answer is I never do. I just get frustrated. It's a Saturday morning or whenever it is, and I think like, I'll just take a stab at this, and I'll start a new repo, and it won't do anything, and I'll push it up to GitHub, which is sort of like an accountability measurement. Like, well, now I got this repo, I got to start working on it. Now I'll get the build up, and then the build will break, and then I got to get the build working, and then pretty soon that becomes then I'll tweet about it, and now I'm on the hook to like whoever follows me on Twitter that I'm going to follow through and make this thing work. And it's that perpetual motion machine of accountability, of like, hey, I'm going to do this thing, even if I'm not really sure, and I'll give it a try. And the benefit that I think people don't realize is that if it fizzles out, or if you never come back to it, or if people don't adopt it, it just sinks to the bottom of your repositories list. That doesn't cause any harm. Right. It's taking up a little bit of namespace in NPM or Ruby Gems or CPAN or whatever. But other than that, it's fine. It can be inert. And you're going to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and some of it'll stick. Like the things that people know me for are just this arbitrary set of a half dozen projects out of 300 that happen to resonate with some people, but they're by no means my favorite projects. They're the ones that I thought would be, successful. So unless you're actively just throwing stuff out there and trying and working in the open, you can't expect the day to come where you're just going to like have solved E = MC squared and then like, publish it and then get all these accolades, right? It never works that way. It just looks like it works that way.
Do you think, I think it's easy for people to look at, the thought leaders, and be like, oh, well, they got it together. They're, for whatever reason, they have the thing that is that gives them the thought leadering ability, right? Do you think, I think about that sometimes, and do you think it's possible that what that is like the activity of being like thought leadering is actually being like participating in the actual activity? It's not necessarily having the right answer. It's participating in the conversation that might lead to having the right answer.
Right, absolutely. And I think in some ways we still have high barriers of entry. CFPs are really, like if you want to speak in front of a conference, they're really, really competitive. A conference like this one, I think, got 500 or 600, proposals to speak, and they could only accept, 40 or 50 or something like that. And so I work with my staff a lot because a lot of them are aspiring or really good, talented speakers, but they're lesser known. And so they have to go 20 at-bats before a conference will accept them. But on the other hand, Twitter, how does Tom Dale and Yehuda know who I am? Like, they met me by me spewing fire at them on Twitter with really hard, sharp, tacked questions, delivered as kindly as I could when I was struggling to learn Ember. And then I'd meet them in a conference and they'd put a face to a name and be like, oh no, you're that guy. But slowly we could develop a relationship through just the discourse because Twitter has a very, very low barrier of entry. And I think, similarly, I tried to break into open source several times in like 2004, 2005, back when everything was on mailing lists, Subversion or CVS, repositories. And I had no clue how I was ever going to like make a patch and get that accepted because nobody knew who I was and it was really awkward. But GitHub forks made it really, really easy. And so I think, in general, if you can find the spaces that have the lower barrier of entry, whether that's going to a meetup or engaging on Twitter or on GitHub and just being present and thoughtful, it doesn't mean you have to contribute. It just means you have to be there. The funny thing is, like, we all have these little avatars, and people recognize them right away. Like, I know who you are, guy with that little like Green Lantern logo who's in all of my repositories because I see you a lot, and you've contributed a little bit, and you asked some good questions. So if I meet you in person, we're going to have a much richer starting point.
Yeah.
Thought leadering is really just like that extra little tiny leap that you realize that there's a man behind the curtain, there's nothing special about these people. We're all just broken individuals doing our very best to write good software. And there's really nothing special beyond that, I don't think.
I know you're right because, so I've been known as Ember Sherpa for a while, and then, I'd go to ng-conf and people are like, oh, you're Ember Sherpa. I'm like, I'm really flattered, like I'm so glad to meet you, right? But it's so strange because at the end of the day, I'm just some dude who likes to help people with things,
Yeah.
And so, with my little, claim to fame, I could confirm that at the end of the day, somebody who you think so somebody that you like is at the end of the day is some person who probably likes somebody else too, and is just a normal person who happens to be on Twitter tweeting about things that you like, and at the end of the day, we're just some folks who...
I mean, we're talking a lot these days about how media has become so balkanized.
Right.
So like, depending on like who you follow on Twitter, Ember Sherpa might be a pretty big personality. But you're a big fish in a relatively small pond.
Right.
You're still just a normal person.
Right, exactly.
And I think about this a lot when I talk to people. I think that the temptation is to pretend that thought leadering or becoming a name in a community is like some sort of ticket. That like now I've made it and I need to guard and like build a moat around this and build my brand. But really, the way that most of us became speakers, and I know this is true of your work, is like your goal is to demystify software. It's to make plain things that are complicated and confusing.
Right.
And so I feel like it's incumbent on speakers and personalities in our community, and I think a lot of the Ember personalities do a good job of this, to humanize themselves, to an extent self-deprecate themselves, and meet people where they are and like encourage other people to step up.
Yeah.
Like whenever I sit down at a breakfast or a lunch at a conference, I feel like my role is to facilitate a panel discussion where I try to learn as much about all the people that I'm talking to as possible.
Right.
Because odds are I'm more comfortable than they are right now, and I want to do everything I can to make them comfortable stepping in and activating.
Yeah, I think it's there are some. We don't know what's going to be successful in communication with people, right? Like you don't know what you're going to. If you write somebody a message on Twitter, you don't know what is going to kind of catch their attention. But I think one thing that is kind of a sure tell, like most likely to give you the right answer, is just like at least be nice.
Yeah.
Be nice to people that are talking to you, and sometimes people are not nice, and try to be nice to those people too, because at the end of the day, it's so easy to be misunderstood or even...
I think about this a lot because I dish out some hard truths and hard falsehoods. When you make a lot of big bets, especially on Twitter, like a condensed medium, I'm wrong a lot.
Yeah.
And I see so many other people, especially people in positions of power, who feel so threatened when they're called out as being wrong, or maybe as saying something that was offensive to somebody or hurt somebody's feelings. And they'll go 30 at-bats to be like, no, I really meant this, and what's more important is like I was trying to say this, and the implication is that it's the recipient's fault for receiving the information a certain way. But frankly, it's so much easier just to learn to apologize. Say, you know what, I'm sorry. I really didn't handle that well. I didn't mean that. Whatever my intention, the impact it had was bad, and I'm sorry. And then instead of having 45 replies and a terrible weekend, you feel a sense of relief. You swallow your pride a little bit, and it's no fun hitting send on that. But then afterwards, you're like, okay, I reclaimed the moral high ground and I can move on. Because I think a lot of people who are afraid of engaging are afraid of the game of musical chairs to stop and the spotlight to be on them, and them being called out as wrong or dumb or not progressive or inclusive enough. And as long as you're willing to say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing, it's like a get out of jail free card for almost anything online.
Right.
And it's like that. It's being kind and nice to people.
One thing that I'm hearing is being able to accept being wrong, or and I think that's part of being, in a way, that's part of being fearless to express your ideas, right? Like, how do you think someone goes about to actually develop that kind of attitude, or that bravery to actually allow themselves to be in public and make a mistake, or
This is a tricky one because. Me as a white dude who owns a business in America,
right.
I have a lot of privilege to be able to be vulnerable. I can say, hey, I'm a big dum-dum, and if anything, people are going to look at that and be like, look at that guy. But if I was, a member from a marginalized community who is typically judged, and I was a beginner, and I wasn't well known, and I'm like, I'm a big dum-dum, people would be like, yeah, that's right, that confirms our biases.
Right.
And that's not good. So in a part, the reason I do it now that I do have influence is I want to model for the industry and for the people I talk to that this is a normal thing to talk about our weaknesses and our shortcomings. We should all be doing it. And anyone who's pretending like they've got it all figured out, they're the wrong ones.
Right.
But in the beginning of my career, the reason that I speak the way that I do, that I try to be a polished presenter, is because I had to fake it till I made it. I had to fit in these really traditional organizations where you just kind of had to puff your chest out and act like the smartest guy in the room to get anything done. And I hated doing that, and I don't want that to be that way for others.
I think we could probably
We
keep
could
this
go on all
conversation
day.
going for a while.
It's a very
so-
comfy chair. Is the problem.
It is very comfortable, and I really like this topic. I like that you speak your mind, but also about things that are actually important. So thank you for the presentation you gave yesterday. I think it's talking about soft stuff at a technical conference is not, I think, the easiest thing to do, but a lot of times the question that people are not asking, the answer to the question people are not asking sometimes is the right one.
Yeah.
And I think that your presentation and the way you presented it definitely made it approachable and it left an impact. So thank you, for looking at yourself to give people an opportunity to see themselves.
Hopefully people came to the workshops today a little bit rejuvenated with the spring in their step, and hopefully they are able to take that to work next Monday and think a little bit differently and see ways to succeed in whatever environment that they're in right now.
And try something new as a way to resolve their
inner
feelings.
tumult. Thanks a
you
lot,
very much,
Taras.
Dustin.
Appreciate it.
Hey there. Are you into reactive programming using JavaScript? Do you have to deal with asynchrony in your web app? Then join this instructor Ben Lesh to learn all of the ins and outs of RxJS in his hands-on workshop. Available online and in person, go to rxworkshop.com for more details and to book your spot today. Hey there. Do you use Angular? Do you like fun in the sun? And how do you feel about boats? If you're nodding yes, then come join us on ng-cruise to learn more about Angular while on a fabulous Caribbean cruise. Check out ngcruise.com for speaker lineup, workshop details, and to book your spot today.